Tune in weekly and listen to the Collateral Damage podcast, where Michael Wilson and Maureen Cavanaugh host a variety of special guests to discuss topics and available services that will help you learn about the impact that substance use has on our lives, our families, and on our communities nationwide. Episodes and listening information can be found at www.cdpodcast.com. You can also search for Collateral Damage Podcast on your favorite listening platforms or watch previous and future episodes on YouTube. Don't forget to subscribe and share.
Welcome everybody to another episode of Collateral Damage, and once again I am sick and so my voice sounds awful. Thank you for putting up with it. You'll enjoy it throughout the rest of the show.
It's the paleness.
It is, and the paleness. Yeah, I look like a ghost.
Yeah.
I'm here with my co-host Maureen Cavanaugh.
Hello, how are you?
Yeah.
I know how you are. You're not well at all.
Yes, I know I'm not well, but still, we are here. And today we have some special guests with us. We have Rod Rushing from the Peer Coach Academy in Colorado, along with Angelo Lagares from the Latino Recovery Advocacy in Florida, who is partnering up with Rod, and we're going to hear about that a little later on in the show. But welcome. Thank you for joining us, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us.
Of course.
Excited to talk to you.
Yeah, it was very nice to meet both of you, and I was kind of catching up before the show and just getting to understand what it is that the two of you are up to out there. And maybe, Rod, you could start by telling us what it is that you do.
Sure.
And maybe we can learn a little bit about how you were able to draw Angelo in to your new project.
Okay, that sounds great. So actually, Peer Coach Academy was founded in 2014. I went out to CCAR and fell in love with the CCAR Recovery Coach training, and I became a trainer, and I brought it back to Colorado. Mm-hmm. And we became a nonprofit in 2016. And so I've just been doing recovery coach trainings because we didn't have much of that going on here at the time. And CCAR's program is really person-centered, and so much I love about it. Mm-hmm. And I think we've trained this year, it showed since 2015, really when we did our first training, 787 people have been certified as recovery coaches in Colorado. And we've trained 50 recovery coach trainers in Colorado.
With me.
Yep.
Yeah, one with Maureen.
Now, can I ask you a quick question? Because out here in Massachusetts, we have 60 hours of training that's necessary. So it's the initial 30, which is the RCA, the Recovery Coach Academy, and then an additional 30 that's made up of a variety of different things, including the motivational interviewing and a variety of other things. Now, do you take your students through beyond the initial RCA, beyond the initial 30?
Yes, I do. I actually have been back to Connecticut like 5 times, and I've become a core trainer for CCAR. So I train all the curriculum that they have, which is 7 different trainings.
Wow. And
I do a couple others on the side. I'm going back to get the Lemire and Wolfling's harm reduction pathway. Yep. Training in March. I'll be in Connecticut for that. So yeah, we do a certification, and then we do trainings for national and state accreditation.
Okay.
NADAC also has a 60-hour requirement for trainings, as does Colorado for their state credential. So we do.
So they have a credential for the recovery coach as well.
Right. It's actually a tri-peer credential. It's for mental health peers and substance abuse peers and family peers.
Okay. And so do you assist with that? So if somebody's coming through and they're doing the recovery coaching, that you'll assist them in pursuing that credential as well?
Yeah, no, we encourage people to do the full accreditation. I think we've put through 100 people in Colorado from PCA to become state peer credentialed peers. Mm-hmm. And I think that NADAC has seen probably 50 or so of our people becomes nationally accredited peers.
Okay, that's great.
Which opens up billing possibilities and all sorts of things. So yeah, it's good.
Oh, so that the coaches would be able to do billing, use insurance?
Yeah, right. Medicaid has a billing bucket for coaches, and many of the private insurances are now moving towards that as well.
Yeah.
Gotcha. But now, what is it that, Rod, what got you started back in, what'd you say, 2014, when you took the initial CCAR training? What motivated you to get into this?
Well, it's a sort of harmonic convergence. Firstly, I started my own recovery journey in 2004, and I got asked to participate in a peer sort of program for HIV positive individuals here in Colorado. And unlike Chicago, where I'm from, and it's not like any big deal if you're HIV positive or not. There's a lot of stigma in Colorado, or I guess there still is. And so I started doing client advocacy for people, mainly driving people to and from the doctor who weren't going. And then I also co-facilitated a peer support group. And what I learned, number one, beyond the fact that all the things I really hated about myself suddenly became things that I could offer to support other people with. So it sort of transformed a lot of my internal guilt. But I also saw that the power of somebody non-clinical involved with people is pretty big.
Yeah.
And our support group that I co-facilitated went from having like 6 people every week going to a year and a half later, there were 22 to 28 people going every week.
Wow.
And it wasn't because of Rod rushing. It was because the dynamics of the group changed from being totally clinical to more about being checking in, catching up, and connecting.
Yeah.
And that's really what people need just as much as they need treatment.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I became a counselor. I'm a certified addictions counselor here, level 3. It was the top you can do without a master's. And then I started working in the field, and I realized again that the people who were marginalized, LGBT population, sex worker population, IV drug populations, all of whom I worked with, did well initially in treatment, but when it came time for them to launch into recovery communities, they didn't do very well. And I assumed that it wasn't because the recovery community organizations or systems like 12-step or whatever weren't working. It was because people had their own internal baggage that would keep them from connecting. So I started peer programs so that we could address some of that while they were in treatment. And that's how I got involved in all of this. And I realized that it needed to be outside of treatment would work better than working inside the treatment program for connecting after treatment, if that makes sense.
It does. Yeah. I mean, and I like the non-clinical peer approach is that, in addition to whatever services you're getting professionally, that, making that connection as a peer and having somebody, that has been through what you've been through or can coach you through what you're going through and help you achieve your goals. I mean, that's something that, when I did the Recovery Coach Academy and the TOT and stuff like that, it's, we're teaching people how to be ambassadors for someone else's recovery, how to help, get over that bridge and find direction. And so, it's impossible for most clinicians to step in at that role, or most licensed professionals to step into that role, because they have to keep some sort of professional separation. They're not able to like get into it with them. So, having these large numbers of people being trained that can be out there and be that additional support, that additional resource. I love it. I think it's great.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's such a big need. I mean, the numbers of people who are not doing well are just way out of proportion to what things should be like. So yeah, that's kind of how I got started with CCAR and the Peer Coach Academy. I was looking for something that was a little more inclusive. And I just kind of approach my trainings as an invitation to the people I'm training to be more generous when they're working with people.
And now you're in Colorado, but anyone from anywhere could come and take one of these trainings.
Well, we'd love for them to, actually. So yeah,
and
the more diverse the training, the more enriched is the training experience.
Of course, yeah.
The more we learn about things outside of ourselves, the more open we are to being more generous.
So now people would have access to that through CCAR, correct?
I don't think it's listed any longer on the CCAR website.
Okay.
We are at PCAColorado.com.
Oh, okay.
It was such a good experience to do that too, because it got me out there to see what was going on out in Colorado.
Right.
Because when, how often do you have the opportunity to do that? And I mean, it was go to Connecticut, go to Colorado.
Yeah.
And it was definitely, it was such a great thing to have done because I got to learn about what was going on out there.
That's huge. And so,
and the mountains are beautiful.
Yeah,
and so is Mr. Rushing. He's a lovely person. I enjoyed his company very much.
So now, how did you?
We did have fun.
Now this has evolved into something where you're now collaborating with BSAS on a grant. Is that correct?
That is correct.
SAMHSA.
So
SAMHSA. Okay, I'm sorry.
I entered into a SAMHSA grant with a Kansas peer program. And we wrote for the B Corps grants, which is Building Communities of Recovery. And I honestly had been doing most of this work, like doing outreach to rural areas because of the numbers of the overdose epidemic. And I realized they didn't have much support out there. So I just pretty much wrote to support the work I was already doing. And then I had encountered LARA, Angelo's program through Facebook. And so I included that in the grant because Colorado is 20% Hispanic community. So, and what I've learned, it's been such a learning experience, and I'd love to have Angelo talk about it a little bit, is I've learned so much about my own bias about just things being in English, you know? The whole behavioral health field is transforming currently because of the opioid epidemic, all the money coming through, et cetera. Everything is transforming, but it's only transforming in English. And it's only transforming for certain pockets of the population.
Right.
And so there's going to be a bigger gap than there already exists for services moving into the future if we don't make an effort to bring those services, make those services available to more people.
So we're doing it again, is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So could you tell us a little bit about LARA, which is the Latino Recovery Advocacy?
Latino Recovery Advocacy. Yes, my name is Angelo Lagares, and I'm the founder and director. It's the first advocacy nonprofit organization to promote recovery support services in Spanish, to promote cultural competence, the important elements in building communities. When you build a community, you cannot leave 50% of the population out. Like, you know, Boston is a huge Spanish population, New York, you know, Texas, California. And then when you build a recovery-ready community, you cannot live, you know, like 57 million people that be Spanish. And we're talking about health disparities. We're talking about 80 years. Because when they say the opioid epidemic, I can understand that. But this go beyond, you know. We've been in a public health epidemic the last 100 years. This system don't work for everybody. We're talking about 1920s, 1930s. We're talking about, you know, Johann Hari, and he had a book called Chasing the Scream. This guy came from London to address, you know, the war on drugs and health disparities. How are you going to talk about, you know, changing policy and you're going to leave people of colors, the people more affected in the drug? I'm talking about the crack epidemic. What's devastation? The consequences of the crack epidemic in the 80s was like catastrophic, okay, for families, for communities. You didn't have like the advocacy movement. You didn't have like all these tools. What they did was mass incarceration.
Right.
You know,
that was because nobody could come forward, because if you came forward, you went to jail.
Right.
That was the tool for the government. Okay, we're going to put all these people in jail, you know. And I was born in New York, raised in the Dominican Republic. I was the guy who was 40 times to treatment. I spent my whole life in a lot of treatment. And thank God for my family. They was educated, you know, in substance use disorders in those days, like in the 80s. And, you know, in my uncle, he studied to become a doctor in New York, and he understood about that. And that's why he sent me to treatment once, you know, he sent me a lot to treatment. And I was able to go to treatment and to experience different modalities of treatment in those days, right?
Mm-hmm.
In 2005, and when I came back, I started working in Palm Beach County. You know, it was like the capital recovery of the world in those days, you know, and I started working in treatment and became a recovery coach and became, you know, peer support. And I understood, because people was coming to treatment, paying all these high deductible, and then they didn't have no resources for them. No therapy that speaks Spanish. The people was paying $40,000 a month for treatment, and there was like loss in treatment. And I used to do like everything, and that's why I had the idea. Also, I was working through SAMHSA database and speaking like 800 numbers in the crisis intervention phone line, and I was speaking to everybody in the United States, you know, and a lot of mothers and grandmothers was calling me in Spanish, right? And that was devastated, like, oh, my son is smoking crack or shooting dope, and what am I gonna do? I'm gonna take it to church. And there was like all the culture of treatment wasn't there for them. And I was, no, he needs some medication. He's like, he got the disease, you know. And I was talking to these people in Spanish, and I understood that I needed to do something. And that's I created LARA to fight, to do the advocacy work. From there, you know, like Facebook and Drug Free Kids Foundation partnership, they did a documentary this year. And when they approached me, I say, we got to do this in Spanish. Everything that I do got to reach these 57 million people. And then it's really important that one boss, that project is telling some support through Russian Academy, that we put that element. Not only Spanish, if you go to a community, you have to understand the culture. You have to understand the need for that community. You understand? Like any community, it can be African American, can be Chinese, can be anything. We have to, when we build the recovery community, we have to understand the need for that community. Don't leave people behind. And what happened now, the last 10 years, everything is changing. The way we speak about addiction, the way we treat addiction, we talk about harm reduction, we talk about not abstinence, we talk about all these tools, and once again, health disparities. You know, we're forgetting about the people that most suffer. And that's what I'm trying to promote, that everybody gotta be aware of what is cultural competence, what's the definition of cultural competence, what is the definition of basic human rights, right? Imagine that mother that is desperate and don't speak the language. Where's she gonna get information? And that's why I'm creating all these platforms, different platforms, to get that information out there.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, so you're helping to take a lot of this information that's being created, like through the, you know, partnership and, you know, through the coaching academy and stuff like that, to get this done in multiple languages. I mean, you're obviously promoting the Spanish language, but just really recognizing the cultural atmosphere in these communities and making sure everybody has access to this. And your primary focus obviously being the Latino Recovery Advocacy. Are there other groups that are comparable that are trying to create a platform for their own language and stuff like that? Or are you really just kind of promoting it for all languages and for all areas?
I'm promoting basically for Spanish, but I also promoting cultural competence in every sense. Right. If your community needs, you know, I'm making aware of organizations that reach out in the community and understand what they need. If they need, you know, all different languages, you know, like do that, you know.
Yep. Well, and family support is very different in Hispanic culture than it is in Anglo culture. Yep. So even though this term family support is universal, it looks and is delivered very differently by the people who are receiving it and the people who are giving it.
Of course.
Part of the grant, if I can just jump in, part of the grant that I'm also excited about is recovery community organizations. And I think you guys on the East Coast are a little more advanced than we are here. Having standalone organizations that provide recovery education, addiction treatment education, recovery support services, and community education. We don't have too many of those here. I think there are 4 or 5 in Colorado. Okay. So part of what we're also doing in the grant is developing new recovery community organizations, especially in rural and parts of Colorado that may not have so much. So hopefully at the end of our 3-year grant, we'll have 10 or 15 new recovery community organizations in the state. And all of those will be exposed to and incorporate cultural influences, Spanish speaking, as well as farming versus urban communities sort of things, et cetera. Is that sort of making a little
It does, yeah. I mean, that's huge. It's like you got such a diverse group of people out there struggling in a variety of different ways. And I mean, you know, if your approach is standard and kind of cookie cutter, then you're marginalizing an entire group of people by not addressing their issues, or at the very least being sensitive and, like you said, culturally competent, that, you know, people deal with things in different ways. They have different resources, they have different needs. And so, you know, creating those RCOs out in your area so that people have access to services sounds amazing.
Well, I hope it goes well. I mean, it's being pretty well received thus far, and we'll see. But, you know, and I'm sure, Maureen, you opened my eyes to a couple of these things. But if a family is, a parent or a couple of parents are struggling with their kid and trying to figure out the insurance and what they can get, et cetera, where do they go?
Yeah.
And recovery community organizations aren't committed to any one treatment program, so they're able to give a little more insight without prejudice about what to do, about what possibilities there are for their kids.
Yeah, because we have, you know, I think now we have a lot of different places in Massachusetts where you can go for family groups. I don't like, even in some of the areas that have more Hispanic people, I can't think of any place that you could go where the meeting would be in Spanish.
Right.
And I mean, even Magnolia has 25,000 people in it. I would love to have a Spanish speaking group in Magnolia so that family members could go and get the same support that we get, you know, in all the other groups, but
right.
It would require, maybe you know somebody who would want to run one of those, Angelo. That would be awesome, because I see the need. I just sometimes, like, you see the need, but I don't know what to do about it. But I like you were saying earlier.
And that's why LARA is here. You know, like, if you got those concerns, you can call me. We can do the outreach, you know, and we can find out and develop, you know, like a Spanish group in that area.
I would love that.
That's what I'm doing. Like, you know, like giving that support and translating the material and getting the people out there, because there's not a Spanish-speaking therapists around there. I'm working now with Choices, Ginger Ross, and developing all the training for peer support in Spanish. And then we're going to use it with Royal Academy, and we're going to train families. And we're going to train, you know, we're going to train. And
she's in New Hampshire, right?
Yes.
That's who I did my recovery, my initial class with.
Ginger Ross, right?
Yeah, that's great.
She's great. We got like a couple of months together doing all the translation, and we're gonna team up with Rod, and I'm doing also,
and Maureen probably,
and Maureen, and the recovery project with Ryan Hampton. I'm part of the recovery project. You know, like that really aggressive advocacy to change policy, because when we talk, we can say a lot, and people say, well, yes, I understand, but when we change the law, and people be like, you know, and it's money involved and it's law involved, and maybe people are going to change, you know, and understand the right way to do this is incorporating, you know, being inclusive, diverse, you know.
Well, I don't think sometimes people don't know what they don't know. And I know when I went through the Recovery Coach Academy, and you remember this, we did that power walk where you have to, you know, you understand kind of, because we all have our thing. And as you walk, inevitably you're walking across that floor, and you're the only one or one of few people that are walking across, and you start to understand what that, you know, that bias is. But I don't think people realize, as hard as all this is, how difficult it is to be a person of color or a person that does not speak English, to have to go through this process.
Right.
And how, I mean, talk about left behind, right? We all feel left behind to a certain extent, but when you're adding those things into it, it becomes, you know, it becomes even more difficult. And then, you know, decades and decades of a different kind of treatment for people who became involved with drugs. Right. And all that brings with it, as far as the family idea of even reaching out and trying to get help. And I mean, we still have it in Massachusetts. I have somebody that came to me, and you know, everywhere he went, and he was a person of color, he got detox, and he wasn't being moved along. And until, you know, and unfortunately he passed away too, just recently. But I think that this is what happens, and we don't realize this is happening. And even the people that are doing you know, maybe acting in a discriminatory way, don't even get what they're doing. And that's why I'm glad you're out there drawing attention to it.
Yes.
Yeah, I've had some real aha moments where I have realized how ingrained my own biases. You know, I'll work on a newsletter, or work on communication, or work on a website or whatever, and I will complete it, and I think I've done a really good job, and then I publish it, and I didn't give one thought to anybody who doesn't understand English.
Right.
You know, it's not even in my it's not even in my conscious to consider that.
Yep.
And that's part of what the problem is, trying
Right.
to do things themselves. That's why we need more people at the table.
Absolutely.
I agree.
Absolutely. Very
I agree.
important.
I'm glad to hear that you guys are able to embark on this journey, this 3-year journey, to try to develop new resources for people. And, you know, I know for myself, I guess I've been doing this for about 10 years. And well, what I do, I work with families and do interventions and such. And, you know, over the past 10 years, I don't get a lot of diversity, you know? So, I mean, I get comfortable addressing the population that comes to me, not thinking that, excuse me, maybe there's a population of people who don't come to me because I'm not promoting to them. I'm not making my services so available to them or easy to read or find. And, you know, I mean, I guess you just don't think about that. You kind of take what comes to you. And
That's the issue, really. I don't think it's cruelty, it's privilege.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways.
It's the way that the public health system has been like that for the last 100 years, you know, but have to change. When we create this awareness, you know, it's going to change. And that's what we're doing now with LARA and working with different platforms. And it's going to change because people are open. When I bring the awareness, oh yes, you know, like Massachusetts, it's a huge population. I'm going to start working with different churches and different platforms over there to create programs in Spanish. And I think people are open to it and making the steps. You don't have to speak Spanish to do the outreach, you know.
Right.
But well, the other thing is there's stigma too. And so I relate a lot of this epidemic or this situation that we find ourselves in to where HIV and AIDS was in the 80s.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just so much guilt and shame around families having issues in their, you know, issues. And so they're afraid to ask for help. They're ashamed to ask for help, let alone thinking that there is actually somebody who might understand or whatever.
Right.
So it's hard to see over the hill if you don't even know you're looking at a hill. One other thing I just want to think about, or want you to think about or whatever, you know, I'm such a goofy guy, but the HIV treatment community, the AIDS community globally has shifted its approach to how they treat populations, infected populations or individuals. They used to have treatment per individual, you know, like it's you come in and see the doctor and you do this, and the approach was all individualized, and they have, over the years of providing treatment for a lot of people with chronic illnesses, they have zoomed out on how they look at treating and working with the issue. And so they have this thing of U equals U. Do you know about this?
No.
Which is undetectable equals untransmittable. So if we can get you to the place where you're untransmittable, or you know you're undetectable, then you're not going to be a danger to anybody else in the community, right?
Wow.
And so they stopped looking at individuals and started looking at their entire population of cities and communities and trying to get the number of undetectables so high that there wouldn't be any more increase in transmissions.
That's huge.
And so, isn't it crazy?
Yeah.
To look at the system from a community standpoint instead of an individual case standpoint, you know.
Really
and so I think that there's some room for insight and growth for substance use and recovery and mental health if we started to look at it from the same way. If we could get it to the place where everybody's treated instead of treating individuals, you know, making it look at a community sort of caseload instead of individual caseload. Anyway,
that's interesting. I mean, speaking, have you noticed that there's and I don't know the stats on this, that there's a climb, we're seeing an upward climb in the cases of AIDS diagnosed recently?
Yeah, and that's because of the shifts in policies that have happened under the last 3-5 years. I think a lot of the PrEP has gone away in a lot of places. I think that safety, syringe exchange, all those things are being pulled because of philosophical reasons.
Yeah.
And not because of caring for the people reasons.
Yeah, because I know that I've had 3 people in probably the last 6 months that I know that have been diagnosed, and I can't. The last time I remember that happened, it was in the 80s.
Wow.
I know, it's nuts.
And something really important with when we learn from history, when we learn from this system, you know, and we have to go back, you know, we have to understand the heroin epidemic in 1970s. You know, is that movie Denzel Washington, American Gangster, that they present how devastated was the heroin epidemic in the African American community in 1960s and 50s. How like people like Miles Davis, you know, like all these jazz musicians in the 50s and 40s, Joe Contrain and all these great musicians was affected through substance use disorders, you know, alcohol, and how devastating it was for them. The story of Billie Holiday. And imagine all the African American community in the 50s and the 40s, they didn't have no hospitals to go to. They have no treatment. And when we go and see history and the different epidemics, not only the opioid epidemic now, but when we study history, we learn, and then we change. And I'm really optimistic, you know, that we're going to change and we're going to create more diversity and inclusion, and we're going to love everybody, because I think support services, recovery support services, is like love, you know, bringing that tools to that mother, bringing that tool to that grandmother that they don't understand about addiction, you know. And I think I'm pretty optimistic that we're going to change this in the future.
I hope so. I hope you're right.
I'm just busy pushing rocks off the road. I don't know about optimistic, but I'm just shoveling rocks off the road. So we can get, that's all I'm doing.
We got to get the families involved, because that's what happened, you know, with the HIV, is that the families started to speak up and get involved. So we have to make that happen. And I think it needs to be, I always say that it needs to be more than the families that have lost people. We have to have the families that have gotten through this and gotten to the other side. And now we should have all this energy and enthusiasm to make things better for the people that are still struggling. We have to get our families involved in this. And I would love to be able to get some Hispanic families leading the way on Magnolia as well.
Absolutely.
There's probably a funding possibility in there, Maureen. I'm telling you.
No, it just needs to happen. You know, it needs to happen.
Yeah.
We're going to continue this conversation. You know, he got my email. I'm going to send you an email with all the resume everything that we did, you know, in the last 4 years.
Yep.
And you know, we work with Bill White. We do a lot of writing with different advocacy groups. And I'm hoping to go there and create a system, you know, in Massachusetts for families and individuals for recovery support services.
So I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Part of what I hope happens, since we're working with SAMHSA, is that at the end of 2 or 3 years, we will have developed templates that people don't have to recreate everything.
Right.
So there'll be a guide, you know, there'll be a roadway or a roadmap or whatever to doing some of these things. So, and we hope that by replicating it here in Colorado, we can learn a few things about how you have to be resilient or whatever to make it happen in different arenas and different communities. So hopefully all that will translate at the end of our 3-year grant with SAMHSA, so that things can be plugged into New Mexico and Maine and other states and communities as well.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad that the two of you are working together and that you're continuing to try to make it better for everybody, which is what that's just you, Rod. I know that. And it's so nice to be introduced to Angelo, who seems to be doing this in the Latino community. And I thank you for that. So if somebody wants to get in touch with either one of you, ask more questions, see what you're doing, or get involved somehow, how should they get in touch with you?
Well, they can reach me at rod@pcacolorado.com. We have a 800 number. I don't answer it all the time, 800-604-8978, but I always respond. So.
Okay.
And you know, I'm going to send you my information, my email, lagares441@gmail.com. And when you Google Latino Recovery Advocacy, you know, you're going to see, like, you know, everything there. You know, I got a Facebook page. I'm developing now a website. But my number is 561-727-7588. And I'm going to send you that information so you can post it on your website. And we open, and I'm always, you know, answering the phone, emails, you know, and doing the outreach in the community.
Can you share that in Spanish, Angelo?
Claro, es muy importante para las familias que busquen ayuda, tú sabes, con este problema de salud mental y adicción, y vamos a crear sistemas de apoyo para las familias, grupos para familias, you know, servicios de recuperación para individuos que están en el proceso, y LARA es una organización sin fines de lucro que promueve salud mental y adicción, organizando comunidades y creando información en español.
Wonderful.
Claro.
Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you.
Oh, you guys, thanks so much for having
Thank you.
us.
Thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
It was very nice to meet you, Rod. I apologize that I didn't get to come out and do your TOT training. And I did mine down in Connecticut anyway. But and Angelo, it was very nice to meet you, and I'm really happy to hear that there is somebody out there that's giving a voice to this population and making sure
It's
that
pretty amazing, isn't it?
these services
really
are gonna be accessible by, you know, the people who need it. So thank you very much for doing what you do.
Thank you for the
Thanks, guys.
platform.
All right, guys.
Ciao.
Take
So
care.
long. Thank you.